The acrid stench of burning flesh mingles with the metallic tang of blood across the scarred battlefield of Aeonia. Two titans stand locked in their final exchange. Malenia, blade of Miquella, her prosthetic arm raised high as scarlet energy builds around her like a gathering storm. And General Radahn, the Starscourge himself, his massive frame tensed as gravitational forces bend reality around his colossal swords. In the canonical timeline we know, this is the moment everything changes. The moment Malenia abandons her pride and unleashes the scarlet rot that will transform Caelid into a festering wasteland. The moment that breaks Radahn's mighty mind, leaving him a mad beast wandering the dunes. But what if it hadn't happened that way? Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we're exploring one of Elden Ring's most fascinating alternate histories. What if, in that pivotal moment when Malenia reached for her most desperate measure, Radahn had been just a fraction faster? What if the mightiest demigod had truly lived up to his reputation and emerged victorious from the Battle of Aeonia? The implications ripple outward like gravitational waves, fundamentally altering not just the fate of two demigods, but the entire structure of power in the lands between, the cosmic order itself, and the very journey we undertake as Tarnished. Picture it. Malenia's scarlet bloom beginning to unfold, that terrible beauty of decay spreading its petals, when suddenly the very air grows heavy. Radahn's mastery over gravity, the same power that holds back the stars themselves, collapses inward with crushing force. The rot withers before it can fully manifest, compressed into nothingness by the fundamental forces of the cosmos. Malenia staggers. Her last gambit failed, and for the first time in her legendary undefeated career, she falls. The blade of Miquella, who has never known defeat, lies broken on the battlefield of Aeonia, and Radahn stands triumphant, his mind intact, his power undiminished, his destiny forever changed. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first revisit what actually happened in the history we know. The Battle of Aeonia wasn't just another skirmish in the Shattering, it was the collision of unstoppable force and immovable object, a clash between arguably the two mightiest warriors among Marika's demigod children. Malenia had carved a path of victory through the lands between, her waterfowl dance leaving armies in pieces, her skill with the blade unmatched even among beings of divine blood. She had humbled Godric the Grafted so thoroughly that he grovelled at her feet, begging for mercy. Her march toward Caelid was the march of inevitable victory, or so it seemed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into what could have been, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth explorations coming. Radahn, meanwhile, had established himself as perhaps the greatest warrior the lands between had seen since Godfrey himself. From childhood, he had idolized the first Elden Lord, training relentlessly to embody that same overwhelming might. But unlike many warriors who rely solely on physical prowess, Radahn combined his massive strength with brilliant tactical acumen and mastery of gravitational sorcery that defied comprehension. He learned this magic not for conquest, but out of love. Specifically, love for his scrawny horse Leonard, whom he refused to abandon even as he grew to titanic proportions. The same general who could hold back the very stars was gentle enough to use his power to spare his beloved steed from his crushing weight. This combination of overwhelming power and surprising tenderness made Radahn unique among the demigods. The actual battle was a grinding stalemate that stretched on until both combatants were pushed beyond their limits. We know from various armor descriptions and battlefield remnants that neither could overcome the other through conventional means. Radahn's gravitational magic and raw strength met Malenia's speed and technique in perfect opposition. Every meteor called down from the heavens was deflected by Malenia's blade. Every flurry of strikes was repelled by barriers of compressed space. The Cleanrot knights and Redmane soldiers watched in awe and horror as their commanders transcended mortal combat, their clash reshaping the very landscape around them. It was in this deadlock that Malenia made her choice. The pride she had carried as an undefeated warrior, the honor she had maintained even while bearing the curse of rot. She abandoned it all. As Millicent would later tell us, Malenia cast aside everything to meet Radahn's measure. The scarlet bloom erupted from within her, a nuclear explosion of decay and pestilence that transformed Caelid from a verdant landscape into the nightmare we know today. The sky turned red, the ground cracked and oozed with corruption, and the very air became poison. But here's what many don't fully grasp. Malenia's attack didn't actually defeat Radahn, not in the traditional sense. His great rune, that piece of the Elden Ring that enhanced his already mighty frame, gave him enough resistance to survive the initial blast. What the scarlet rot did was far crueler. It ate away at his mind, reducing the brilliant tactician and honorable warrior to a maddened beast. Radahn became a creature of pure instinct, feasting on the corpses of friend and foe alike, wandering the wastes of Caelid in an endless, mindless hunt. Yet even in madness, even with his consciousness shattered, his gravitational hold on the stars never wavered. That's the true measure of Radahn's power. His magic continued to function on pure instinct, holding back cosmic forces even after he had forgotten his own name. If you're finding value in this exploration of Elden Ring's alternate possibilities, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible. Now, let's explore our divergence point, the moment where everything changes. Imagine Malenia beginning her transformation, the scarlet rot building within her like pressure in a volcano. In our timeline, Radahn couldn't stop it in time. But what if he had recognized the danger a split second sooner? What if his instincts, honed through countless battles, had warned him of the catastrophe about to unfold? Radahn's mastery over gravity wasn't just about pulling meteors from the sky or holding back constellations. At its core, gravitational magic manipulates one of the fundamental forces of reality. In that crucial moment, as Malenia's bloom began to unfold, Radahn could have created an inverted gravitational field, not pulling things toward him, but creating a point of infinite compression directly at the source of the rot's expansion. The scarlet bloom, instead of erupting outward, would collapse in on itself, the rot consuming its own essence in a cannibalistic implosion. Picture Malenia's shock as her ultimate technique, the power she had held in reserve through every battle, simply fails. The rot that has been both her curse and her strength throughout her entire existence betrays her at the moment she needs it most. For someone who has never known defeat, who has built her entire identity around being unbeaten, this wouldn't just be a physical loss, it would be an existential crisis compressed into a single moment. Radahn's victory wouldn't come through overwhelming force alone, though he certainly possessed that in abundance. It would come through the perfect synthesis of all his capabilities, the strategic mind that recognized the threat, the magical mastery that could counter it, and the raw power to capitalize on Malenia's moment of vulnerability. As the scarlet bloom collapsed into nothing, Radahn would surge forward, his colossal blades moving with speed that belied his massive frame. Malenia, exhausted from her failed transformation and reeling from the shock of defeat, wouldn't be able to mount her usual flowing defense. The blade of Miquella falls to her knees in the mud of Aeonia, her prosthetic arm shattered, her flesh blade broken. For a moment, the battlefield falls silent, except for the labored breathing of two demigods pushed beyond their limits. But only one remains standing. What happens next would depend entirely on Radahn's character, and here's where things become truly fascinating. The Radahn we know from the game's lore wasn't simply a conqueror. He was a protector, a general who inspired genuine loyalty in his soldiers. The Redmane knights didn't follow him out of fear, but out of respect and admiration. Even in his madness, they organized a festival to give him an honorable death, unable to bear seeing their general reduced to such a state. This speaks to a nobility in Radahn that many players overlook. Would he execute Malenia on the battlefield? It's possible. But consider this. Radahn learned gravity magic out of love for his horse. He held back the stars to protect the lands between from their influence. These aren't the actions of a bloodthirsty warlord, but of someone capable of both terrible violence and surprising mercy. More likely, Radahn would see in Malenia's defeat an opportunity. She bears a great rune after all, and in the logic of the shattering, claiming it would be his right as victor. But there's another layer to consider, one that the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC revealed in stunning detail. Radahn and Miquella had a history, a vow made in their youth. "Lord brother," Miquella had said, "I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort." This vow haunted both of them. When Malenia whispered to Radahn during their battle, she said, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." In our timeline, this becomes relevant only after Radahn's death and resurrection. But in a world where Radahn wins, where he stands victorious over Miquella's blade, this vow takes on entirely new dimensions. Radahn might spare Malenia not out of mercy, but as a message to Miquella. Your blade has fallen. Your enforcer is defeated. What now, little brother? The political implications would ripple outward immediately. Malenia's defeat would mean Miquella loses his most powerful protector, leaving him vulnerable in his cocoon within the Halig tree. Without Malenia to guard him, Miquella's transformation into a god becomes virtually impossible. The immediate aftermath of Radahn's victory would transform the battlefield of Aeonia from a scarred wasteland into a monument to his triumph. Without the scarlet rot's corruption, Caelid remains the verdant landscape it once was. The great bridge where they fought might become a pilgrimage site for warriors seeking to understand how the mightiest demigod claimed his victory. The Redmane soldiers who witnessed the battle would spread word throughout the lands between. General Radahn has defeated the undefeatable. The strongest demigod has proven his supremacy. With Malenia's great rune added to his own, Radahn would possess power that eclipses any other demigod. His own great rune enhances his vitality and strength, while Malenia's represents the cycle of decay and rebirth, the ability to turn defeat into power. The combination would make him nearly godlike, a warrior who grows stronger with every wound, whose already massive strength is multiplied beyond comprehension. No other shard bearer could hope to challenge him in single combat. But Radahn's consolidation of power wouldn't stop at claiming Malenia's rune. The general who once conquered the stars themselves would understand that true victory requires more than battlefield supremacy. It requires control. The Redmane army, already formidable, would swell with new recruits drawn to serve under the demigod who accomplished the impossible. Veterans from Malenia's clean-rot knights, those who survived their commander's defeat, might even bend the knee rather than face annihilation. Radahn has proven himself honourable in victory before. He might offer them a place in his forces, rather than wholesale slaughter. The political landscape of the lands between would shift dramatically. Godric the Grafted, cowering in Stormvale Castle, would likely surrender immediately, rather than face the general who defeated the warrior who had already humiliated him. Rykard, despite being Radahn's brother, would have to reconsider his blasphemous ambitions. The serpent god of Volcano Manor might be willing to devour the very gods, but would he risk confronting Radahn at the height of his power? Even Morgoth, defending Leyndell with fundamental determination, would have to acknowledge that Radahn now represents the greatest threat to the capital's stability. The stars themselves remain frozen in Radahn's gravitational grip, and with his mind intact and his power growing, that grip would only tighten. This has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate military situation. Ranni's fate, intrinsically tied to the movement of celestial bodies, becomes impossibly complicated. In our timeline, Radahn's death is necessary for her age of stars to begin. The stars must move for her destiny to unfold, but with Radahn victorious and stronger than ever, Ranni faces an impossible choice: confront her brother directly, or abandon her plans entirely. Consider the cosmic implications of Radahn's continued hold over the stars. We know from various sources that the stars and constellations carry fate itself, that their movements determine the destinies of those touched by their influence. Radahn hasn't just paused astrology, he's frozen fate itself for countless beings. With his victory over Malenia proving his might, would he finally release this hold? Unlikely. If anything, his triumph would reinforce his belief that he alone has the strength to protect the lands between from whatever cosmic horrors await among the stars. The Carian family dynamics become extraordinarily complex in this scenario. Radahn, son of Radagon and Rennala, has just defeated Malenia, daughter of Radagon and Marika. He holds the power to determine Ranni's fate by maintaining his stellar blockade. Rykard pursues his own dark path in Volcano Manor. The family that was already fractured by the shattering now faces a new reality where one brother holds unprecedented power over the other's ambitions. Meanwhile, in the Haligtree, Miquella's situation becomes desperate. Without Malenia to protect his cocoon, without his blade to enforce his will in the physical world, his transformation faces immediate threat. Mohg, Lord of Blood, had already stolen Miquella's body in our timeline, but he did so while Malenia was away fighting. In a world where Malenia is defeated, but potentially still alive as Radahn's prisoner, Mohg's machinations become far more complicated. Would he still dare to infiltrate the Haligtree? Would Radahn, now holding power over Miquella's protector, use this as leverage against the young Empyrean? The vow between Radahn and Miquella looms over everything. Miquella's plan, as we learned from the DLC, required Radahn's death and resurrection to create his ideal consort. But what if Radahn, victorious and with his mind intact, confronted Miquella about this vow directly? The conversation between them would be fascinating. Miquella's manipulative compassion meeting Radahn's straightforward warrior's honor. Radahn might view the vow as the naive promise of children, something to be set aside now that they've grown into their power. Or he might see it as a chain to be broken through strength, just as he broke Malenia's undefeated streak. The age of compassion that Miquella envisions becomes impossible without Radahn's cooperation. The gentle world that Miquella dreams of, where all are embraced equally under his loving rule, requires Radahn as consort to enforce it. But this Radahn, triumphant and unbroken, has no reason to submit to anyone's vision but his own. He embodies the warrior's path, the strong protecting the weak through might, rather than through universal love. These philosophies are fundamentally incompatible. Interestingly, Radahn's victory might actually stabilize the lands between in unexpected ways. The shattering continues, but with one demigod holding such overwhelming power, the endless stalemate that defines our timeline couldn't persist. Other shard-bearers would have to choose: submit to Radahn's authority, flee beyond his reach, or unite against him. That last option seems unlikely given the fractious nature of the demigods, but desperate times might forge unlikely alliances. Consider how the underground eternal cities would react. They've long opposed the Golden Order and the Greater Will, but Radahn represents something different. A power that literally holds back the stars they revere. Would they attempt to assassinate him with their black knife assassins? Would they try to manipulate events to break his gravitational hold? The cosmic forces that Radahn restrains aren't just abstract concepts. They're entities with their own agendas, their own champions among the underground civilizations. The most fascinating change might be in how Mohg's plans evolve. In our timeline, he steals Miquella to create his Mohgwyn dynasty, attempting to elevate Miquella to godhood as his consort. But with Radahn holding Malenia's fate in his hands, Mohg faces a terrible choice. Does he proceed with his plan and risk Radahn's wrath? Or does he attempt to negotiate, perhaps offering an alliance against their common enemy, the Greater Will itself? The Lord of Blood and the General of the Stars, united in turn, their rejection of the current order would be a terrifying force. For the common people of the lands between, Radahn's victory might actually bring hope. Caelid remains uncorrupted, a breadbasket region continuing to produce food rather than rot. The endless war between Malenia and Radahn that devastated so much of the land never reaches its catastrophic conclusion. Radahn, for all his might, has shown care for the weak. His love for Leonard demonstrates this. Under his rule, the lands between might experience a harsh but fair peace, enforced by gravitational might rather than golden order. But let's examine what this means for our journey as Tarnished. We arrive in the lands between to find a very different world. There's no scarred Caelid to carefully navigate, no rot swamps to avoid, no Millicent quest line to follow, because Millicent herself might never be born from the scarlet bloom that never happened. Instead, we would face Radahn at the absolute peak of his power, holding at least 2 great runes, commanding armies that span from Caelid to potentially Limgrave itself. The festival of Radahn that we know, the gathering of champions to grant a mad general an honorable death, would never occur. Instead, we might find ourselves recruited into Radahn's forces, or marked as a threat to his new order. The general who learned warfare from studying Godfrey would recognize Tarnished as the spiritual successors to the first Elden Lord. Would he see us as worthy challengers to test his might against? Or would he view us as usurpers to be crushed before we can threaten his reign? The bosses we face would change dramatically. Radahn wouldn't be a mad beast in the desert, but a calculating general in his fortress, surrounded by his loyal army, wielding magic and might with perfect clarity. The battle against him wouldn't be about exploiting the openings left by madness, but about somehow overcoming a demigod operating at peak performance. His meteor attacks would be more precise, his gravitational magic more controlled, his swordplay combining brutal strength with tactical brilliance. Other quest lines would shift as well. Ranni's quest becomes potentially impossible if we can't kill Radahn to free the stars. Fia's quest changes because Godwyn's fate might be different with such a powerful force controlling the lands between. Goldmask and Corhin might see in Radahn's strength a different interpretation of the Golden Order's will. The fundamentalist and the scholar might argue whether Radahn represents the Greater Will's chosen champion or its greatest rebel. The endings available to us as Tarnished would necessarily change. The Age of Stars requires the stars to move, which requires Radahn's defeat. But could we achieve that against this version of him? The Frenzied Flame ending might become more appealing to a desperate Tarnished facing an unbeatable foe. If we can't overcome Radahn's order through strength, perhaps burning everything with chaos is the only option. The Age of Order under Goldmask might actually align with Radahn's vision of strength maintaining peace, creating potential for alliance rather than conflict. A new ending might even emerge. The Age of Gravity, where we don't usurp Radahn, but join him in holding back the cosmic forces that threaten the lands between. Imagine becoming Radahn's champion, helping him maintain his stellar blockade while bringing his forceful order to the entire realm. It wouldn't be the gentle embrace of Miquella's compassion or the cold freedom of Ranni's stars, but something else entirely, a warrior's peace maintained through absolute strength. The relationship between Radahn and the Greater Will becomes crucial in this alternate timeline. The Elden Beast and the Greater Will have their own agenda, their own vision for the lands between. Radahn, by holding back the stars and accumulating power outside the traditional Golden Order hierarchy, represents both a useful tool and a potential threat. Would the two fingers still guide Tarnished to challenge him? Or would they recognize his strength as serving their purpose? The shadow of Marika herself looms over all of this. The queen who shattered the Elden Ring set these events in motion, but did she anticipate one of her children accumulating such power? Radahn's victory might actually serve Marika's hidden purposes, creating a force strong enough to challenge the Greater Will itself. Or it might represent her worst fear, a child who surpasses her in strength, but doesn't share her vision for the world's future. We should also consider how Radahn's victory affects the spread of different forms of power throughout the lands between. The Scarlet Rot, contained and defeated, never spreads beyond Malenia herself. The Lake of Rot remains isolated, its influence unable to expand without its greatest champion's bloom. The Kindred of Rot never emerge in the numbers we see in our timeline. This fundamental force of decay and rebirth is diminished, perhaps permanently, but other forces would fill that vacuum. Radahn's gravity magic might spread as warriors and sorcerers seek to understand and emulate his power. The Alabaster and Onyx Lords, those beings who originally brought gravitational sorcery to the lands between, might emerge from their isolation, drawn to or threatened by Radahn's mastery of their arts. The cosmic forces that Radahn holds at bay would seek other champions, other ways to influence the world below the frozen stars. The merchants and trading routes of the lands between would flourish without Caelid's corruption. Caravans could travel safely from Limgrave to the eastern shores. Trade would flow more freely, and civilization might actually begin to recover from the shattering's initial devastation. Radahn's Redmane castle, rather than being a fortress holding back corruption, would become a center of power projection, possibly even a new capital to rival Leyndell itself, the Kang. Treatment of those afflicted with various curses would change as well. Without the Scarlet Rot spreading as a plague, resources could be redirected to addressing other afflictions. The Frenzied Flame, Death Blight, and other maladies might receive more attention. Radahn himself, having defeated the Rot's greatest champion, might be seen as a figure who can overcome any curse through strength alone. This could lead to a somewhat brutal philosophy. Those who cannot overcome their curses through strength don't deserve to survive. In terms of military innovation, Radahn's intact, brilliant tactical mind would continue developing new strategies and applications of gravitational magic. Imagine Redmane knights trained in basic gravity manipulation, able to leap great distances or pin enemies to the ground. His army wouldn't just be numerous and loyal, they'd be equipped with techniques and strategies no other force in the lands between could match. The traditional advantage of magic users over physical fighters would disappear when every soldier can manipulate fundamental forces. The role of dragons in this alternate timeline deserves consideration. Radahn's hold over gravity and the stars might affect the ancient dragon's power, derived, as it is, from stone scales and gravitational manipulation. Would ancient dragons like Fortisax ally with or against Radahn? Would the dragon cult see in him a figure worthy of worship, a human who has mastered the cosmic forces the dragons embody? The dragon communion practiced by some Tarnished might take on entirely new meanings in a world where Radahn demonstrates that humans can match cosmic beings in power. As we near the conclusion of this exploration into what could have been, we must grapple with the fundamental question: would Radahn's victory actually create a better world? On the surface, preventing Caelid's corruption seems unquestionably positive. Keeping Malenia from spreading the scarlet rot saves countless lives. Maintaining order through strength might be preferable to endless, chaotic warfare. But there's a darker interpretation to consider. Radahn holding back the stars indefinitely means countless beings never achieve their destinies. His accumulated power makes him effectively unchallenged, creating a stagnant order maintained through force rather than natural evolution. The very things that make our timeline tragic, Malenia's desperate bloom, Radahn's madness, the corruption of Caelid, also create opportunities for change, for new powers to rise, for the Tarnished to ultimately determine the world's fate. Miquella's age of compassion, whatever its flaws and manipulations, at least promised universal embrace and acceptance. Ranni's age of stars offered freedom from the greater will's influence. Even the frenzied flame's chaos represents a form of equality in destruction. But Radahn's order would be something else, a meritocracy of strength where the mighty protect the weak, but only so, long as they remain mighty. It's the philosophy of the warrior taken to its logical extreme. The beauty and tragedy of Elden Ring lies partly in how the shattering created a world where anything became possible, where even a lowly Tarnished could rise to become Elden Lord. Radahn's victory might have prevented much suffering, but it also would have closed off many paths to change. The stars would remain frozen, fate itself held in suspension by one demigod's will. Is that salvation or another form of tyranny? Perhaps the most profound change would be in the very nature of the struggle for the Elden Ring. In our timeline, the ring remains shattered, with its pieces scattered among the demigods, none strong enough to claim them all. But Radahn, holding multiple great runes and commanding overwhelming force, might actually be able to reunite the ring through conquest. Not as Elden Lord serving the greater will, but as something new. A gravitational god holding the very cosmos in check while ruling the lands between with an iron fist wrapped in stardust. This exploration of what might have been reveals just how delicate the balance of power in the lands between truly was. One moment of difference in the Battle of Aeonia, Radahn's gravity responding a heartbeat faster, Malenia's bloom faltering for just an instant, would cascade into a completely different world. The rot that never spreads, the stars that never move, the vow that remains unfulfilled, the journey we never take, all of it hinges on that single moment when pride was abandoned and madness was born. Thank you, fellow seekers of lore, for joining me on this journey through an Elden Ring that never was. The beauty of Miyazaki's world-building lies in how these alternate possibilities feel just as real, just as valid, as the canon we know. Radahn's victory wouldn't simply change the game's story, it would fundamentally alter the philosophical questions at Elden Ring's heart about power, godhood, and the price of order. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into alternate history, please consider subscribing to join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Hit that notification bell to catch future explorations of gaming's richest narratives. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think Radahn's victory would have changed the lands between? What quest lines would emerge in this alternate timeline? Share your theories in the comments below, and until next time, keep seeking those hidden truths in the spaces between the stars.